Pilot denies black woman access to the cockpit, then realizes she's the airline's lead flight trainer. In the hum of a bustling airport terminal, destinies can collide in ways no one ever expects. A single moment at the cockpit door can forever alter the course of two lives, revealing hidden truths about power, prejudice, and perseverance. This is the story of a seasoned pilot who believed he held all the authority in the skies, and the quiet, determined black woman whose very presence threatened to topple his illusions. When he slammed that cockpit door shut, he had no idea she was the airline's lead flight trainer. What followed was an unforgettable clash of egos, history, and fate. John Jack Myers was not just any pilot. He had flown for nearly 2 decades, logging countless hours in some of the world's busiest skies. His uniform was always crisp, his tie always perfectly knotted, and he carried himself with the measured confidence of a man who believed he had mastered his domain. To him, the cockpit was sacred ground. Only those worthy of respect and trust should ever step foot there. His frequent passengers, impressed by his no-nonsense manner, sometimes called him Captain Jack, a nickname that had stuck over the years. On this particular morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, a real hub for Delta Airlines, Jack walked with the brisk stride of a man in a hurry. There was always a sense of purpose in every step he took through the concourse. He was scheduled to pilot a Delta flight to Minneapolis, a familiar route. The day seemed routine, perhaps even boring. He had done this so many times before that the details blended together, like the repeating pattern of carpet beneath his feet. However, as he approached the gate, something caught his attention, a black woman with a calm but unwavering presence. She was standing near the boarding area, dressed in a sharply tailored business suit. A small group of airline personnel clustered around her. Despite the subtlety of her posture, she seemed to command the focus of everyone there. Jack felt a vague twinge of curiosity. High-ranking staff from corporate or specialized operational teams often visited major routes, especially in training or oversight capacities. But there was something about her composure that set her apart. She had that quiet self-assurance that people either respect instantly or resent bitterly. Jack, preoccupied by the flight he was about to command, brushed the curiosity aside. He had more pressing matters on his mind, including a slight mechanical check on the plane's auxiliary power unit that had delayed boarding. Still, as he passed, he offered the standard polite nod to the small cluster of employees just to show he acknowledged them. The woman met his eyes. For a brief second, something flickered there. Jack couldn't read it, respect maybe, or something else. He shrugged it off and proceeded to the cockpit. Inside the cockpit, he began his routine checks, flipping switches and cross-verifying data with the first officer, a junior pilot named Hannah Park. She had been flying with Jack for a few months, a promising talent, but still wide-eyed at times. Hannah was the sort of diligent, precise second in command Jack usually approved of. She listened more than she spoke, which was how he preferred it. As the cabin door finally opened for boarding, flight attendants bustled about, greeting passengers, checking seatbelts, and fielding the usual rapid-fire questions about overhead bin space. Jack locked his focus on the overhead panels, verifying that everything matched the pre-flight checklist. But behind him, faint chatter wafted through the open cockpit door. A flight attendant's voice, "Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Let me just speak with the pilot." Then the footsteps approaching. Jack tensed. He wasn't expecting any additional visitors today. The door parted wide enough for the flight attendant to peek in. "Captain, we have a corporate visitor who would like to—" Without waiting for the attendant to finish, Jack turned his head. He spotted the same black woman from the gate. She appeared at the threshold of the cockpit, ID badge in hand. He instantly felt the corners of his mouth tighten. A reflexive wave of territoriality washed over him. The cockpit was his realm. If there was any need for a visit, he should have been informed beforehand by the airline. In his mind, no one should walk in unannounced, especially when flight preparations were underway. "Is this absolutely necessary?" Jack asked sharply. The flight attendant stiffened. The woman at the door, however, remained perfectly poised. "I'd like to come in for a quick look at the instrumentation before we depart," she said in a calm voice. "I have approval from—" Jack's annoyance rose. She didn't even seem to hesitate as she held out her badge. He didn't bother reading the details. "That's not how it works," he cut her off. "Unless I receive confirmation from Ops or from the chief pilot's office, I'm not letting anyone in here." A brief flicker of emotion passed over the woman's face. Disappointment. "Something else?" She nodded once. "I can contact them," she said quietly. "Yes, do that," Jack nearly snapped. He turned back to his instrument panel. That, he believed, was the end of it. He had a plane to fly, a schedule to keep, and no time for random corporate inspections. Perhaps she was a flight attendant trainer or a mid-level manager from headquarters fishing for extra details. But she was stepping on the wrong toes today. The woman left without another word. Only Hannah noticed the silent tension that lingered. The first officer raised her eyebrows slightly, as if to question her captain's abruptness. But Jack gave no explanation. He simply resumed his routine, ignoring the uneasy pang in his chest, ignoring the sense that he had just made a significant miscalculation. Moments later, the passenger boarding doors closed. The flight crew prepared for pushback. Jack never gave the incident another thought. He'd dealt with intrusions before. Let them talk to corporate. Let them get the proper channels in place. He had a job to do. Little did he know that the gears of fate had begun turning the moment he denied that woman entry. By the time the wheels touched down in Minneapolis, his world would be upended in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The flight from Atlanta to Minneapolis was typically uneventful, a cruising altitude of around 35,000 feet, flight duration of just under 2 hours, and weather patterns that rarely posed a challenge for an experienced pilot like Jack. He had flown this route countless times over the years. Yet from the moment they lifted off the runway, he couldn't shake the memory of that woman at the cockpit door. His reaction felt off, but he shrugged it away. Sometimes you had to be firm to maintain cockpit security. That's how he rationalized it. Hannah noticed the tension too. She'd never seen her captain cut off someone so abruptly, especially another airline employee. But she kept her observations to herself. There was a hierarchy in the cockpit. The captain's authority was paramount unless there was an immediate safety concern. She had no desire to step on Jack's toes, especially given how meticulously he guarded his domain. As the plane leveled off and the seatbelt sign flicked off, the flight attendants began serving drinks and peanuts. The hum of the engines was steady, a distant lullaby beneath the professional chatter over the radio. Jack double-checked the flight plan, made minor adjustments for wind speed, and accepted a cup of coffee from one of the flight attendants. All standard, all normal. And yet, a certain heaviness settled over the cockpit, like a storm cloud just waiting to unleash its fury. Partway through the flight, an unexpected call came through the cockpit phone. Jack picked it up, expecting a flight attendant with a routine question about a passenger or a connection in Minneapolis. Instead, he heard a voice from the airline operations center. "Captain Myers, we've received a request from Miss Alicia Ross to observe the cockpit. She's stating that this is an authorized training audit." Jack's eyebrows shot up. So that was her name, Alicia Ross. He pressed his lips together. "I have no record of such an audit," he replied curtly into the handset. "If it's a standard procedure, I should have been notified well in advance." There was a slight pause. "Miss Ross is a senior training consultant, actually, the lead flight trainer. It appears she's in transit to evaluate how in-flight procedures align with certain new protocols. She was scheduled to coordinate this with your flight, but there might have been a communication breakdown. She's requesting to observe any portion of the flight from the jump seat. Jack's fingers tightened around the handset. He glanced sideways at Hannah, who pretended to be completely focused on the altimeter. Jack was at a crossroads. The official policy did allow authorized trainers to sit in the jump seat to observe flight deck operations. However, it typically required coordination before departure. Still, if Alicia Ross genuinely had the clearance, then by refusing, he could be violating protocol. He exhaled, steadying his voice. We're already en route. The flight deck door policy is strict post 9/11. Unless there is an emergency or absolutely essential operational reason, we're not supposed to open that door except during critical phases if necessary. I've never heard of an exception for an unplanned inspection. Silence on the other end. Then operations responded, the final decision rests with you as captain, sir. However, Miss Ross is quite insistent. She says her clearance is top level. She also mentioned something about evaluating pilot readiness for the new Boeing cockpit interface we're transitioning to next quarter. Jack felt his chest tighten. The mere mention of an upcoming Boeing interface upgrade was significant. It was a major shift in Delta's operational procedures. If Miss Ross was heading that training, that meant she was a big deal. His first officer shot him a questioning look. He avoided her eyes. Look, it's too late for mid-flight. We'll be landing in less than an hour. Let's follow standard procedures and reconvene on the ground. That's acceptable, said operations, though there was a note of caution in the dispatcher's voice. But just be aware that Miss Ross does outrank typical training staff. She might file a formal complaint if she deems it necessary. Jack hung up. A wave of annoyance washed over him. He felt cornered, threatened, as though someone was challenging his authority in the place he least expected. The cockpit was his fortress. Never before had he encountered a scenario where an airline official insisted on intruding without prior notice. Part of him resented that this was happening at all. Another part was worried he might be stepping into a deeper conflict. Hannah finally broke the silence. Captain, you okay? He nodded stiffly, refusing to show any sign of doubt. Yeah, I'm fine, but the set of his jaw suggested otherwise. The flight continued without incident, though to Jack it felt like the longest flight of his career. Each minute dragged, overshadowed by the awareness that Alicia Ross, Delta's lead flight trainer, was somewhere back in that cabin. She had the power to shape how pilot training, licensing, and recertification might be handled in the future. A negative report from her could have serious repercussions on his career. He'd worked too hard, flown too long, to let that happen now. At last, the time came for descent. Jack and Hannah maneuvered the aircraft flawlessly, gliding it gently onto the Minneapolis runway. Reverse thrusters roared, landing gear squealed, and the plane slowed to a calm taxi toward the gate. When they finally parked, the seatbelt sign clicked off. Passengers stood to grab their belongings from the overhead compartments. Jack removed his headset and exhaled. The flight itself had been smooth, but the real turbulence was about to begin on the ground. He could sense it. Before the cockpit door opened, he braced himself. He vowed not to let this Alicia Ross undermine his authority. Little did he know that his impulsive decision to block her from the cockpit would set a chain reaction in motion that would change everything he thought he knew about being a pilot and about himself. Alicia Ross never asked for special treatment. She grew up believing that every victory had to be earned, especially if you were a woman of color in an industry dominated by men. Born and raised on the outskirts of New Orleans, Alicia developed an early fascination with flight. Every day, she would watch planes soar overhead, leaving white contrails across the bright sky. To her, they were symbols of possibility, of horizons yet to be discovered. Scholarships became her lifeline. She earned a partial scholarship to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, one of the nation's top aviation schools. There, she encountered a new level of competitiveness, but also mentors who believed in her potential. Alicia was one of the few black women in the program, which automatically made her stand out. Some took her seriously, but many wrote her off as a diversity statistic. Instead of complaining, Alicia spent her nights in the simulator perfecting takeoffs, landings, emergency procedures, and every nuance in between. Slowly but surely, she earned respect through competence. Graduation day came, and Alicia's family watched proudly as she received her degree in aeronautical science. But the real test was just beginning. Alicia discovered that climbing the ranks in commercial aviation demanded more than just skill. It required unwavering persistence. She earned her private pilot's license, then worked diligently toward instrument, commercial, and multi-engine certifications. When her funding ran short, she took an extra job tutoring other students in math and physics to help pay for flight hours. Step by step, she advanced, never losing sight of her ultimate goal, to help transform aviation training from the inside out. During this time, she also discovered her passion for teaching. A few instructors noticed Alicia's knack for explaining complex procedures in simple, relatable terms. What started as small tutoring sessions blossomed into formal invitations to assist in training labs and flight schools. Soon she earned her certified flight instructor rating. The day she guided her first student pilot through a successful solo flight, Alicia felt a profound sense of purpose. Flying was exciting, but helping someone else conquer the skies was exhilarating on a different level. Her reputation spread, and Delta Airlines took notice. The company was launching an initiative to modernize pilot training and needed fresh perspectives. With her technical knowledge, teaching aptitude, and personal experience overcoming countless obstacles, Alicia was a prime candidate. She joined Delta's training department as an assistant trainer, steadily working her way up to become the airline's lead flight trainer. In that position, she oversaw the development of new curriculum, integrated cutting-edge simulators, and revamped how the company approached diversity and inclusion within its pilot ranks. Despite her ascending career, Alicia remained modest. She believed in quiet excellence rather than loud declarations. But her leadership role meant that sometimes she had to assert her authority, especially in the cockpit, where hierarchy and procedure were everything. That's why, on that flight to Minneapolis, Alicia hadn't demanded special privileges. She merely expected the courtesy and protocol due her position. She had worked too hard and paved the way for too many others to let a single pilot's dismissive attitude unravel the progress she had fought for. Little did she know that this incident would do more than just challenge her professionalism. It would test her resilience and reignite memories of the countless times she had been underestimated. Yet Alicia was not one to shy away from conflict. If John Jack Myers wanted to stand in her way, she was prepared to demonstrate that she had every right not just to enter his cockpit, but to command the respect she had earned through a lifetime of dedication, sacrifice, and unbreakable resolve. Jack's ambition, however, wasn't always matched by humility. He could be dismissive of colleagues he deemed less skilled or less committed. Over the years, he developed a reputation for being uncompromising, both a strength and a flaw. Some joked that if Jack liked you, he'd teach you everything he knew, but if he disliked you, he'd leave you in the dark, navigating the flight deck's labyrinth of procedures on your own. His climb up the ranks to captain came with growing accolades. He boasted a near-perfect record of on-time flights, minimal passenger complaints, and a flawless safety record. He was proud of that, and rightfully so, but his ego ballooned with each commendation. Captain Jack started to see himself as part of an elite cadre, an exclusive club of top-tier pilots who had earned the right to demand absolute respect. There were subtle warning signs, though. In simulator checks, instructors noted that Jack occasionally brushed off constructive criticism. He would nod, say, "Sure, I'll keep that in mind," but never truly adapt. His stiff worldview extended to his interactions with flight attendants and gate agents. Though he was never overtly rude, he had a habit of ignoring them unless they were directly relevant to the flight's immediate needs. It wasn't uncommon for him to forget names or cut short small talk, leaving those around him feeling like cogs in a machine rather than valued team members. One particular incident stained his memory more than he cared to admit. A new co-pilot, a woman fresh from the training academy, had tried to point out a discrepancy in the flight plan. Jack, certain of his calculations, had overruled her. It turned out she was correct. There was an error in the wind vector data. Fortunately, it didn't lead to a major problem, but the flight was delayed, and the co-pilot felt humiliated. When the discrepancy came to light, Jack offered a terse apology, but by then the damage was done. The co-pilot later requested to fly with a different captain, citing Jack's unwillingness to listen. Word spread among the junior pilots that while Jack was brilliant at his job, he was also an arrogant stone wall. He had never quite shaken that perception, nor did he particularly care to. In his eyes, he had earned the right to be arrogant. He had thousands of successful flight hours under his belt, navigated countless storms, and served as a mentor to younger pilots who showed real potential. If anyone found him difficult, that was their problem. The flight deck wasn't a place for hand-holding or coddling. It was a place for precision and skill. So when Alicia Ross appeared at his cockpit door, unannounced, brandishing an ID badge he didn't care to read, his reaction was immediate and visceral. He saw in her face a challenge to his authority, an intrusion into the sanctum he believed he alone commanded. His dismissive response was as much about protecting his territory as it was about skepticism of her credentials. After all, no one told him beforehand that a lead flight trainer might be auditing his flight. In his mind, if it wasn't communicated through the proper channels, it wasn't legitimate. That refusal was the culmination of years of building walls and protecting his authority. He didn't realize, in that moment, that Alicia Ross was not just another bureaucrat with a badge. She was the embodiment of the future he had unwittingly resisted. By the time he touched down in Minneapolis, his fate would be sealed in ways he never saw coming, like a clear sky that hides a sudden wind shear. Upon landing in Minneapolis, Captain Jack emerged from the cockpit, only to find Alicia Ross and station manager Charles Davenport waiting. Tension filled the front of the aircraft as Alicia calmly explained that she possessed official clearance for cockpit access and had tried to exercise her right for a spot check. Jack countered that he had received no prior notification and was only following security protocol. Observing the heated exchange, Charles ushered them into a nearby office to settle the matter away from curious onlookers. Once inside, Alicia produced documentation confirming her authority, leaving Jack little room to argue. He offered a terse apology, insisting he never intended disrespect, though his tone suggested he resented the situation. Charles reminded both parties that protocol and cooperation were vital. While no one mentioned gender or race explicitly, the tension hinted at deeper issues beneath the surface. The short meeting ended on an uneasy note, with Alicia determined to seek proper accountability and Jack feeling his authority had been challenged. Before long, word of the confrontation would reach senior management, pushing both Jack and Alicia toward a showdown neither could ignore. News travels fast within airline circles. By the time Jack clocked out for the day, rumors were already swirling among flight crews about a tense confrontation between a Delta captain and the lead flight trainer. Although the details were hazy, some said Jack had insulted Alicia Ross. Others claimed she stormed the cockpit. One fact was certain: higher-ups at the airline had taken notice. Over the next few days, Jack attempted to go about his duties as though nothing had happened. He flew a red-eye to Salt Lake City, another to Phoenix, and maintained his usual immaculate record of on-time arrivals. Yet every time he stepped into the crew lounge or passed another pilot in the corridor, he felt eyes on him. He caught snippets of whispered conversations about the cockpit denial incident. Pride kept him from openly discussing it, but the tension gnawed at him. Meanwhile, Alicia wasn't merely sitting idle. She'd reported the communication breakdown to her own superiors, emphasizing the need for clearer policies and protocols about unannounced visits. But behind closed doors, senior management wanted details. Why had she been blocked from a cockpit? Was it truly just a matter of misunderstood paperwork, or did something deeper motivate the denial? Alicia remained professional, even as she felt the weight of the unspoken question: had race or gender played any part in Jack's dismissive attitude? A few days later, Jack received an unexpected call from Delta's chief pilot, Captain Elena Rhodes. He admired Rhodes. She was known for her fairness and for championing a modern, inclusive approach to aviation. Nonetheless, he felt his stomach drop when her assistant scheduled a meeting to discuss recent events. Jack knew exactly which events. In the chief pilot's office, a spacious room overlooking the tarmac, Jack faced Elena Rhodes across a polished wooden desk. She was in her 40s, tall, with silver streaks in her hair that gave her an air of both experience and resolve. On her desk lay a file with his name on it. "Captain Myers," she began, "I've been reviewing the reports about your encounter with Miss Alicia Ross. She has a sterling reputation here, and so do you. I want to understand your perspective." Jack cleared his throat. "Captain Rhodes, I was never informed of her inspection. She showed up at the cockpit door without prior notice. In my understanding, cockpit security protocols require me to be cautious. I had no intention of being disrespectful, but—" She held up a hand. "I appreciate that. However, Miss Ross provided credentials. The confusion seems to stem from a missed communication. Have you considered that your reaction might have been harsher than necessary?" He felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I was following protocol, ma'am. If it came across as harsh, that wasn't my intention." Captain Rhodes offered a measured nod. "I understand, but Miss Ross's role involves spot checks, and she does outrank typical training personnel. In the future, I'd expect a more measured response, at least confirming her clearance. We've also received feedback suggesting that you were dismissive at best, and perhaps antagonistic at worst." Jack bristled. "I never meant to antagonize anyone." Rhodes leaned forward, her gaze unyielding. "Jack, you have an impressive flight record, but there have been hints before about your reluctance to adapt to new training procedures. The airline is evolving new technology, new protocols, new inclusivity measures. We need every captain on board with that mission." He sensed the subtext. He was viewed as part of the old guard, resistant to change. Was that why Alicia's presence had unnerved him so much? Before he could craft a response, Rhodes continued, "We're in the process of rolling out advanced Boeing cockpit interfaces. Miss Ross is leading that initiative. I'm assigning you and a few other senior captains to a special workshop she'll be conducting in Atlanta next month. You'll learn the new systems under her guidance." Jack swallowed hard, a direct order. "Understood," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Good. I expect full cooperation." "And Jack," she paused, softening her tone a fraction, "this workshop is more than just about the new technology. It's about how we work together as an airline, respecting each other's roles and expertise. I hope you go in with an open mind." He nodded, said his goodbyes, and left the office, feeling as though he'd just been handed a subtle warning. If he pushed back, there could be consequences to his career. The fact that this all stemmed from one cockpit denial felt surreal, but deep down, he knew it wasn't just one incident. It was an accumulation of his attitude, built up over years. Back in her office, Captain Rhodes picked up the phone to call Alicia Ross. They discussed the upcoming workshop and how best to ensure a smooth transition for all the captains involved. Alicia listened, her mind drifting back to that tense moment at the cockpit door. A part of her felt vindicated. Jack was being held accountable for his dismissiveness. But another part of her was weary. She'd spent her entire career fighting to be recognized as an equal in this industry. While this might be a small step forward, she knew the real test would come in the training room, face to face with captains who might resent her role. Corporate waves had turned into a swell, and soon they would crest in a workshop that could redefine how Delta's pilot corps viewed their lead trainer and how Jack Myers viewed himself. The days leading up to the workshop felt like a countdown to an unavoidable confrontation for Jack. Although he tried to maintain his usual composure, an undercurrent of resentment gnawed at him. He'd spent years perfecting his craft, only to be told he now had to learn from someone who hadn't even been alive when he first took to the skies. Worse, that someone had undermined his authority in the eyes of the airline's top brass. Rumors about the mandatory workshops circulated among the older captains. Some shrugged it off as just another training session. Others complained about the bureaucracy of new training modules. Most, however, were curious about Alicia Ross. They'd heard praise for her innovative methods, her insistence on integrating cutting-edge flight simulators, and her passion for bridging the gap between old-school and new-school flight techniques. Jack's frustration boiled over one evening as he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the workshop itinerary. It spelled out topics like advancements in cockpit technology, inclusive cockpit culture, and communication protocols for modern aviation. He scoffed at what he saw as corporate fluff. Did they really need a module on inclusive cockpit culture? Weren't skill and adherence to procedure enough? Driven by pride and anxiety, Jack did something he'd never done before. He attempted a subtle sabotage. He reached out to a friend in the IT department at Delta, hoping to dig up some minor logistical hiccup that could delay the workshop or cast doubt on Alicia's planning. Perhaps a scheduling conflict or an overlooked safety regulation. Nothing overtly malicious, just a little monkey wrench to make the workshop more complicated for Alicia Ross. If it caused her inconvenience or embarrassment, so be it. His friend was hesitant. "Jack, are you sure you want me poking around? Alicia is well respected, and management is backing her project." Jack tried to laugh it off. "I'm just concerned about some of the content. Don't you think we should verify it's all above board? After all, we don't want to waste our time on something unapproved by the FAA." He could almost hear the reluctance on the other end of the line. But eventually, his friend agreed to do a quick check of the workshop's logistical file. Jack leaned back in his chair, feeling a twinge of guilt overshadowed by satisfaction. For all the talk about Alicia being unstoppable, maybe she had a blind spot or two. A week later, Jack's phone buzzed with a text from that same friend. "Found something. More soon." His pulse quickened. He waited nervously for further details, half wondering if this was a bad idea. Late that evening, the friend called with hushed excitement. "Jack, the workshop's originally scheduled location has a conflict. Some glitch in the booking system. There's another group scheduled in the simulator lab that day." Jack's heart pounded. "So it's double booked. That means Alicia's workshop can't proceed as planned, right?" "That's correct." However, Miss Ross already found an alternative slot for the same day, just earlier in the morning. She's flexible, so it's not cancelled, just moved. Deflated, Jack let out a quiet, "Oh." He'd hoped for something more damaging, like a full cancellation or a bureaucratic meltdown. Instead, Alicia had adapted seamlessly. Still, maybe some captains wouldn't like a last-minute schedule change. It could cause confusion, annoy them. That alone might tarnish Alicia's reputation. Grasping at straws, Jack pressed, "Can you make sure that the reschedule notice goes out as late as possible, so more people are caught off guard?" A long pause. "Jack, I'm not comfortable with that. That's stepping into unethical territory. I'll send the notices as soon as possible. This is people's livelihoods and training we're talking about." Jack swallowed, a bitter taste in his mouth. He murmured, "Yeah, you're right. Don't worry about it." As he ended the call, shame mingled with frustration. What was he doing, stooping to petty sabotage? Nonetheless, the workshop day arrived, and the scheduling glitch did cause some minor inconvenience. A few captains grumbled that they had to arrive 2 hours earlier than expected. Some were still bleary-eyed, sipping coffee in the hallway outside the training room. Jack arrived quietly, hoping to blend in with the other participants. When Alicia Ross appeared at the front of the room, laptop in hand, the chatter died down. She greeted everyone warmly, acknowledging the early start. "I appreciate your flexibility," she said, smiling. "We had a little scheduling snag, but I promise this session will be worth it. Thank you for coming on time." Jack hung back, arms folded, watching as Alicia launched into an overview of the new Boeing interface. She spoke with clarity and depth, pulling up diagrams, performance metrics, and real-world scenarios. To his annoyance, the assembled pilots, including some of his closest colleagues, listened with rapt attention. They asked questions, scribbled notes. Alicia answered everything with a blend of expertise and respect. Try as he might, Jack couldn't find a single flaw in her presentation. The technology she demonstrated was genuinely impressive, and her instructions were precise. She guided them through a simulated takeoff scenario, highlighting how the updated avionics would change certain readouts. Even the most skeptical captains nodded, intrigued by how intuitive the new systems appeared. Watching her command the room, Jack realized any attempt at sabotage had been futile. Alicia had come prepared. She'd outmaneuvered every obstacle with grace and competence. It stung his pride, but it also triggered a new feeling, one he wasn't ready to admit, reluctant admiration. By the end of the day, pilots were thanking Alicia personally. A few lingered to ask additional questions. Jack lingered too, albeit on the sidelines, wrestling with conflicting emotions. He had tried to undermine her, only to witness her succeed magnificently under pressure. Any illusions he had that she might falter were now shattered. As he left the training center, Jack's mood was stormy. The sabotage had backfired, leaving Alicia's reputation even stronger than before. And in the back of his mind, he knew he was standing at a crossroads. He could keep fighting this inevitable shift, or he could try to learn from someone who had earned her place through skill and determination. But his pride was a stubborn foe. He wasn't quite ready to surrender yet. A few weeks after the workshop, Delta arranged a series of hands-on flight simulator sessions to reinforce the material Alicia had taught in the classroom. Each captain was assigned a simulator slot, paired with a co-pilot or training instructor, and given a scripted scenario to run through under the updated Boeing interface. Alicia oversaw these sessions, moving from one sim bay to another, offering real-time feedback. Jack arrived at his scheduled time, feeling a mixture of resentment and intrigue. Although he still harbored prideful reservations, a small part of him was genuinely curious about how these new features would perform in a simulated environment. Waiting outside the simulator door, he glanced through the glass window and saw Alicia inside. intently monitoring a prior session. Within minutes, that session concluded and the door opened. A middle-aged captain and a younger first officer emerged, chatting animatedly about how realistic the new interface felt. They nodded politely to Jack as Alicia welcomed him in. The sim bay was set up to replicate a Boeing cockpit in exact detail, every button, switch, and display mirror the real aircraft. Once inside, Alicia introduced him to the training co-pilot, a soft-spoken man named Terry, who'd served in the Air Force before joining Delta. Alicia then explained the scenario: severe crosswinds on approach to a busy airport with a partially disabled runway, requiring a go-around and subsequent instrument landing. The new interface enhancements were designed to streamline pilot inputs and display critical data more intuitively. Jack settled into the captain's seat. As the simulator hummed to life, the digital windows filled with the projected runway and stormy clouds. He felt a jolt of excitement. No matter how experienced a pilot might be, the simulator still got the adrenaline pumping. But behind him, Alicia stood quietly, her arms crossed, observing every move. The first phase of the flight was smooth. Jack followed standard procedures, scanning the updated instrumentation with mild surprise at how clear the readouts were. The flight path vector offered more granular data, and the new autopilot interface allowed for quicker input changes. He had to admit, it was an improvement over the old system. As the scenario escalated, winds gusting, visibility deteriorating, Jack initiated a go-around. Terry called out altitudes and headings in a steady voice, assisting Jack with the required maneuvers. They followed the updated approach plan, yet, at a critical moment, a wind gust forced them off the localizer. Jack tried to correct, but the new autopilot logic kicked in unexpectedly. He found himself momentarily disoriented. What used to be a manual step was now partially automated. His hand darted to the controls, flipping switches he'd known by heart for years, only to realize the new system demanded a slightly different sequence. The simulator's alarms blared. Terry alerted him to an altitude drop. For a split second, Jack froze. He felt an unfamiliar surge of panic. That's when Alicia stepped forward, calm and direct. "Captain, override autopilot now and reacquire your glide slope. Remember the new position of the flight director switch. You've got this." Her instructions came with the same unwavering confidence she'd shown in the workshop. Jack gritted his teeth, but followed them. He toggled the correct switch, wrestled the digital flight director into submission, and regained control. The go-around procedure continued. Moments later, they were back on a stable climb, alarms silent. When the scenario ended, Jack felt a mixture of relief and frustration. He turned to Alicia, fully expecting a barrage of criticisms about his initial confusion. Instead, she gave a small nod. "You recovered well after the autopilot override. The new interface can trip up seasoned pilots if they rely on muscle memory. With more practice, you'll adapt." He blinked, surprised by her measured tone. Part of him wanted to defend himself, to say he'd been thrown into an overly complex scenario. But instead, he found himself asking, "Any tips on how to avoid that confusion in the future?" Alicia smiled genuinely this time. "Practice integrating the new flow. Make it a habit to verify autopilot logic steps in your mental checklist. Once you get the muscle memory for this new system, you'll find it intuitive. You clearly have strong fundamentals. Let's build on them." Jack felt a curious warmth in his chest. He hadn't expected praise. He also hadn't expected to feel grateful. Sure, the flight sim session had bruised his ego, but Alicia's demeanor, supportive yet unyielding, left him with a strange respect for her method. Over the next half hour, they repeated portions of the scenario, each time focusing on the autopilot logic. Jack improved significantly, and Alicia observed with quiet approval. By the end, He'd nailed the approach under even harsher simulated conditions. When the final session concluded, they stepped out of the simulator. Alicia extended her hand. "Well done, Captain." He shook it, his mind awash with conflicting thoughts. In that handshake, he sensed a bridge forming between them, forged in the crucible of a shared passion for aviation. But the memory of their initial conflict still lingered, casting a shadow over any easy reconciliation. Nevertheless, for that one moment, Jack realized they were both on the same side. They both wanted safer flights, better training, and a future where pilots excelled, no matter their background. That realization both comforted and unsettled him. Had he spent years guarding his pride at the expense of genuine collaboration, the question echoed in his mind like distant thunder, promising a storm yet to come. It happened on a routine flight from Los Angeles to New York, a route Jack had flown countless times. The flight plan indicated clear weather across most of the country, with a minor patch of turbulence over the Rockies. Jack, feeling more confident after his simulator sessions, sat in the captain's seat, while Hannah Park, his first officer, handled the pre-flight duties with practiced efficiency. The takeoff was uneventful. They climbed to cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign switched off. Then, roughly an hour into the flight, the weather reports changed. A fast-developing storm cell threatened to block the route, forcing a potential diversion. Jack took the controls, scanning the updated radar. The cell looked more severe than typical turbulence. Lightning flickered in the distance, and ground reports indicated wind shear in the area. As he coordinated with air traffic control, the flight attendants hurriedly prepared the cabin for potential rough air. Hannah, wide-eyed but professional, briefed Jack on alternate airports. The tension in the cockpit ratcheted up when the plane suddenly lurched. They'd hit the leading edge of the storm. "Strap in," Jack muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. He initiated a turn to avoid the worst of the cell, but crosswinds slammed them from the side. The altitude fluctuated wildly, causing the autopilot to beep in protest. For a few harrowing minutes, the aircraft jolted up and down, passengers screaming. Overhead, bins popping open. Jack wrestled with the yoke, his mind flashing back to the updated procedures he'd learned in Alicia's workshop. The new autopilot logic could help if he input the commands correctly, but in the chaos, his instincts defaulted to older methods. The plane dipped again, and alarms shrieked, "Stall, stall." Hannah shouted data from the instruments, her voice tinged with alarm. Jack struggled to recall the new sequence for overriding the autopilot's drag compensation feature. His heart pounded. All those hours in the simulator with Alicia, would they matter now? With a desperate breath, he engaged the override. The autopilot disengaged with a mechanical click. Hands on the controls, he guided the plane out of the stall warning parameters. The aircraft stabilized, though turbulence still shook it fiercely. Hannah scrambled to support, adjusting thrust and reading off the altitude. Slowly, steadily, they fought their way clear of the storm's edge. When at last they emerged into calmer air, the cabin was in disarray, but safe. Jack exhaled a shaky breath. He'd averted disaster by following a combination of old-school pilot skill and the new training Alicia had emphasized. He realized, with startling clarity, how close he'd come to losing control, how if he hadn't adapted those new procedures in time, the outcome could have been catastrophic. Word of the near incident reached Delta's headquarters quickly. The airline launched a standard safety review, focusing on whether the flight crew had acted appropriately. Flight data recorders showed Jack had deviated from the recommended autopilot inputs initially, causing a momentary stall warning. The review board wasn't pleased. In a tense meeting, they questioned why he hadn't immediately applied the new Boeing interface procedures. Jack found himself cornered. He couldn't lie. He had hesitated, partly because of ingrained habits, partly because of pride. The board noted his eventual correct actions, crediting the successful recovery, but they highlighted the unnecessary risk introduced by his initial non-compliance. The verdict: a temporary suspension from flight duties pending retraining. It felt like a crushing blow. Jack's perfect safety record was tarnished. Rumors buzzed among the pilot community. Some said he got what was coming to him: hard karma for resisting change and being dismissive of Alicia Ross. Others expressed sympathy. Storms happen and mistakes occur even for veteran pilots. But the official stance was clear. Jack needed to prove he could fully integrate the new systems without hesitation. That's how Alicia Ross entered the picture again. The airline requested her to supervise Jack's retraining sessions, both in simulator and in classroom modules. A part of Jack bristled at the news she would see him at his lowest point. Yet, as he stared at the suspension notice, he couldn't deny that she was the most qualified person to help him regain proficiency under the new protocols. This was karma in its rawest form, forcing Jack to face the very person he'd tried to undermine. He thought back to the day he refused her entrance to the cockpit, the day he tried to sabotage her workshop, the day she calmly guided him in the simulator. Each of those moments now felt like stepping stones leading him to this reckoning. His career hung in the balance. If he failed to meet the airline standards during retraining, he risked demotion or worse, termination. It was a humbling realization for a man who had once believed himself untouchable. Pride had been his companion for years, but it had led him to the brink of disaster. And now, the only person who could help pull him back might be the woman whose competence he'd once dismissed. The retraining took place in a specialized simulator suite at Delta's main training center in Atlanta. Jack arrived early on the first day, a bundle of nerves. He'd been suspended for nearly 2 weeks, passing each day in uneasy limbo. Now, as he signed in at the security desk, a new sense of humility clung to him like an unfamiliar garment. He entered the simulator bay to find Alicia Ross waiting. She stood by a console of monitors, reviewing flight scenarios. Her posture was calm, her face focused. When she spotted Jack, she approached, her expression unreadable. "Captain Myers," she said by way of greeting, her voice measured. "Shall we begin?" He nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. "Yes, Miss Ross, I'm ready." The words felt foreign to him, so formal, almost contrite. But he wanted to set the right tone. He needed this second chance, and he recognized she held the keys to it. They spent the morning reviewing the flight data from Jack's near incident. Alicia asked pointed questions. Why did you revert to the old autopilot procedure? What was your thought process when the stall warning sounded? Did you recall the new command input for crosswind recovery? Each query forced Jack to confront his own shortcomings, piece by painful piece. He answered honestly, no longer capable of hiding behind bluster. In acknowledging his mistakes, he felt a strange relief. Alicia listened carefully, nodding when a point was valid, challenging him when his explanation was too vague. After a brief lunch break, they moved to the simulator. The sessions were grueling. Alicia programmed scenarios involving sudden wind shear, intense crosswinds, and instrument malfunctions. Each time, Jack had to apply the updated Boeing interface procedures. If he forgot a step, Alicia paused the simulation and walked him through the correct sequence. Gone was the earlier friction where Alicia insisted while Jack resisted. Now, their roles crystallized. She was a mentor, he was a student. Yet Alicia treated him not like a novice, but like a seasoned professional who had momentarily lost his way. Over several days, Jack's performance improved dramatically. Muscle memory adapted to the new system. The autopilot override felt natural, not alien. Each success bolstered his confidence, but a healthier kind of confidence, one tempered by the knowledge that complacency could be fatal. During a break on the final day, they sat in the simulator lounge, sipping lukewarm coffee from styrofoam cups. Alicia broke the silence. "Jack, you've come a long way these past few days. I think you'll pass the recheck flight with no issues." He set his cup down, meeting her eyes. "Thank you. I appreciate your patience and," he hesitated, "and everything else. I was unfair to you before. I guess I felt threatened, like I needed to protect something." Alicia studied his face for a moment. "Protecting the cockpit is important, but not when it means shutting out necessary updates. The airline is changing, the industry is changing, and we all have to adapt, including me." He nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "I understand that now. If you hadn't insisted on implementing these new procedures, I might have crashed that plane. It's not easy to admit, but I see it clearly." A warm smile lit her features, the first genuine one he'd seen from her directed at him. "You're a good pilot, Jack. You just needed to realize that no one's trying to undermine your authority. We're trying to make sure you and everyone else flies safely." Jack returned the smile, albeit faintly. "I see that. Thank you." On the final recheck flight, an official examiner joined them in the simulator. Alicia stood in the background, observing. Jack executed every procedure flawlessly, from a normal takeoff under clear skies to a catastrophic engine failure in mid-flight. He applied the new autopilot steps without hesitation, communicated effectively with his virtual co-pilot, and landed safely under the toughest circumstances. When the examiner announced he'd passed, relief flooded through him like a tidal wave. After the session, Alicia offered her congratulations. "Well done, Captain. The airline should lift your suspension shortly. I'll file my report by the end of the day." He paused, unsure how to express his gratitude in words. "I owe you," he finally said, voice thick with emotion, "not just for helping me keep my job, but for teaching me humility." She extended her hand. "We owe each other respect, that's all." They shook hands, and in that moment, Jack realized how far he'd come from the day he'd barred Alicia from his cockpit. Karma had indeed delivered a harsh lesson, forcing him to face his own arrogance. Yet it also led him to a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a pilot in a world that never stops evolving. Piloting wasn't just about mastering the skies, it was about mastering oneself. By the time he exited the training center, the Atlanta sun was dipping low, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. Jack felt a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. He had a future with Delta again, but more importantly, he had a renewed sense of purpose and a profound respect for the woman he once dismissed. Every story of hardship can lead to transformation when pride surrenders to growth. Captain Jack learned this the hard way when his stubborn refusal to adapt nearly cost him everything. Alicia Ross, once pushed aside, became the very guiding force that saved him from disaster. Their tale reminds us that respecting diverse voices and embracing innovation is not just corporate jargon, it's essential for survival. If a veteran pilot can learn from new perspectives, so can the rest of us, in whatever fields we navigate. If you enjoyed this dramatic saga of redemption and realized how powerful change can be, don't forget to let others know. Hit that like button, share the video with anyone who loves a compelling story, and subscribe for more real-life lessons and captivating dramas. Your engagement fuels new stories and inspires us to keep exploring the limits of human resilience and understanding.